Earlier on, Ibrahim showed us that AI can be used to perpetuate discrimination, either intentionally or unintentionally. However, in migration, AI has been used to expedite border processes and also visa applications. Are there any more beneficial uses of AI that we have not yet explored? If you're wondering, I am too. We might get our answer in the next session, which is our AI Fireside chart. The chart is called Artificial Intelligence for the Social Good, led by Ibrahim Bagheri. Ibrahim is a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer and Biomedical Engineering at Toronto Metropolitan University, where he holds a Canada Research Chair in Social Information Retrieval and an NSEC Industrial Research Chair in Social Media Analytics. He is the director of the NSEC CREATE program on the responsible development of AI. At Bridging Divides, is the scientific co-director, member citizenship and participation working group, and co-lead of the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion working group. So proud to have Ibrahim as a colleague. Let's welcome the panel to the stage.
Perfect. I'm sorry to disappoint. There is no fire here. And you can see how far ahead we were planning for this. We were planning for this in winter, and we thought the fireside chat would be a good one. Just to get us started, how many of you have actually seen a tractor in person? Touch the tractor. Wow. You just messed up my whole argument. The argument was that you don't raise your hand, and then I say, how many of you work with ChatGPT, and then you raise your hand. But anyway, that's good. So now that you've all seen tractors, what do you think about the analogy that AI is the new tractor in this day and age? Raise your hand. How many of you think actually AI will have more economic impact than tractors? Okay, how many of you think tractors had more economic impact than AI? Okay, good number of you. Okay, so based on actual numbers, the American GDP grew by about 8% due to tractors. And, but it also kind of displaced jobs, 2 million jobs, and about 25% of the farm employment in the 1960s, right? Now, so when we talk about these AI disrupting everything and changing and loss of employment, there is precedent with other technologies like tractor, and it's not very fancy today, but it did change the economy by about 8% on the GDP. Now, what Goldman Sachs estimates is that AI will probably only grow our economy, the GDP, by about 7% in the next couple of years. So tractors did actually change our economy much more than what we anticipate AI to actually change. But the other side of this is, I don't know if you can see that date there, says agriculture mechanism, that's December 29, 2020. And it says, and I will read for you, agriculture mechanization in different across the continent of Africa. In 2020, about 80 to 90% of all farmers are still using manual labor. They're not using the tractor. So that 8% increase in GDP in North America was pretty much limited to North America. Africa didn't actually be impacted so much. And this is 2020. And I think we see a similar thing. World Economic Forum, this is from January 16, 2023, kind of warns about a similar trend happening now with the new technology, that the impacts of this technology may, although it's going to increase our economy in the global north by probably about 7 to 8%, maybe we will not see this growth in other parts of the world. Maybe we will see the same trend that happened with tractors also with AI. So that's just so what I wanted to say was that this technological innovation is not really something that's new. We've probably seen this many times in the past, and that's something we want to talk about with my very esteemed colleagues and friends and panelists here today. So let me introduce our panelists to you. Mark Daly is a Chief AI Officer and a full professor at Western University. Mark was previously a vice president of research at the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, CIFAR. So welcome, Mark. Fultz Kom is a full professor at Polytechnique Montreal. He holds a Canada CIFAR AI chair on trustworthy machine learning software systems, and he's a scientific co-director of IVADO, and also a scientific co-director of the Robust Reasoning and Responsible AI CIFREF program. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So what I want to kind of begin with is you telling us a little bit about what you've done in the AI space. How have you possibly deployed AI systems? What were your experiences? Maybe Futz, we can start with you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you everyone for joining the chat. We don't have fire, but it's still warm around. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. So I'm an AI researcher, so I'm interested in all the potential that AI can bring. First, the ultimate pursuit of better understanding of intelligence, right? Our own intelligence and potentially emulating this intelligence. But I'm also mostly interested in bringing this to concrete application and ensure that we deploy them in a way that it's safe, trustworthy. That's why most of my research is around trustworthy AI, and that we generate economic value out of it. So I've been doing a lot of both fundamental research on AI, but also applied research in collaboration with multiple industries. It's something that I'm very keen doing, especially, for example, with the aerospace industry. We have been trying to bring this still imperfect technology in very safety critical ground, which pose a lot of challenges of how we can provide some guarantee around the behavior, how we can provide safety guarantee, and how we deploy this. And we have been successful at deploying in some specific use cases. For example, in aircraft design domain, it's actually machine learning model represents a way more cheaper way than traditional simulation approaches. And we have been able to generate value out of it. So we have been applying also some sensitive area with some social scientists, for example, of detecting reading impairment in kids, right? By using machine learning model, we can track signals and leads to more efficient diagnostic than just the human alone, the clinicians. So it's a technology that has a lot of potential of bringing some good in supporting our existing activities, but also a lot of pitfalls around. So which is the aspect on which most of my research focus try to understand when they can't work, when they fail, what kind of biases we can have in those systems, what kind of robustness issue can they really generalize? Are we in the operation domain of the technology? When we are not in the operation domain, what kind of control we need to put around the technologies? What kind of risk the technology pose, and getting a better understanding of those technologies. So roughly that's the type of things we have been doing, which is what actually inspired our CREF about shifting the paradigm, because we came to the realization that most current learning approach, although they can lead to some capable models, they're still quite brittle, because in many cases, they don't generalize well out of distributions, so they are not robust. The architecture are not very efficient. If you just look at how much resources we need to power ChatGPT, is just insane, right? It's not sustainable. So we need more efficient architecture to learn. And also, because of all the pitfalls we observe around the deployment of the technology, we came to the conclusion that we really need to actively support responsible deployment of this technology. So we have been also active in, especially in Quebec, supporting regulations around AI. Last summer, there was a huge initiative in Quebec to try to come out with some kind of a broad plan to help the government actually push this forward. So that's the type of things that we will be actively doing. And I think I will leave my colleague talk to. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Can you also, I'm going to steal Mirei's question. Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
Oh, of course. I'm a technology optimist. I mean, I spend all my adult life working in technology. I'm an engineer at heart as well, right? So I think technology has the potential of improving our quality of life, right? Just look at accessibility, right? If you look at AI system, just one area we don't talk a lot is robotics, right? So when we'll be able to deploy this technology in a safe way in the physical world, it would unlock a lot of potentials. And so there is a lot of, just look at medicines, right? We can do a lot of personalized medicine, we can do more efficient screening. So there is potential. I think technology, it's good, it's something we really ought to pursue anyway. But I also think the way we deploy technology in the society needs some oversight, right? So that's, yeah.
Thanks so much, Mark.
So I started my post-secondary journey at Berklee College of Music as a music student, and I ran away from music school to become a theoretical computer scientist, which you don't often hear. So because I'm fascinated by computation as an abstract process, not necessarily computation in digital machines, but just computation in general. And so being fascinated by computation, I ended up fascinated in the brain. And so I've spent a non-trivial portion of my career studying computation and information processing in brains in vivo, but also in silico, and models and bio-inspired models. So this is sort of part of my core scholarship. So like, the current era of AI, I made a big bet early on in my career and it paid off, and I didn't expect it would pay off so well. So this is pretty exciting. I feel pretty good right now. So that's sort of I come at this as a researcher, really wanting to understand the fundamentals, how this ticks, why it works the way it does, but also working on biomedical applications, because I had some clinician collaborators who sort of, walked me through a pediatric ICU. And after that experience, I said, okay, how can I help? And got interested in applied research. When I was at CFAR, we had our Learning in Machines and Brains program, which has some of the top scholars in deep learning. It was co-led at the time by Yoshua Bengio and Jan LeCun. So I got to be in the room for those conversations. We have our Canada CFAR AI chairs, Pan-Canadian AI strategy, got to be involved in policy discussions in Ottawa and beyond. And so got very interested in those elements of it as well. Ended up back at Western as CIO, which was an interesting stint, where we had to deliver a lot of machine learning products. So super applied. How do you deliver a system that's going to nominally improve throughput, make things more efficient, make things more fair in a way where they actually are more fair, because it's really easy for these things to go off the rails. And then in my current role, I'm sort of responsible for somehow all things AI at my institution without any actual authority to do that. So, typical academic job.
Perfect. So this is, the breadth of experiences that both of you have. I want to kind of ask you this question that someone asked me last year. I was inviting someone for a responsible AI event. And they said, why is this event called Responsible AI? Do we have something called irresponsible AI? So based on your experiences, do you think everything is responsible AI, or do you think there's something called irresponsible AI, or that's an actually incorrect question to ask?
Okay. Well, I think it's important to emphasize the responsibility aspect of it, right? Because we have multiple examples. I mean, we have seen in the news where the technology has been deployed without much consideration of the impact that it could have on different stakeholders, right? Some popular example in the computer vision domain, right? So some models were trained and calibrated on convenient data sets. I mean, the researcher took the data that was available, they built the model, and then they deployed the model, right? You've shown in your presentation in the morning, right, how you end up with a system that actually becomes segregating the users, right? And this is a functional defect. I mean, it comes from the fact that the algorithm that's the sensor is relying on mostly haven't seen that much samples of black hens, right? So then it's seeking soaps. So in a sense, there are so many ways in which we can get this wrong when we deploy it. because of the nature of the technology as well. It's heavily data-driven, at least the current type of AI that we're currently using that is showing benefits, which is mostly deep learning or machine learning. Is very data-driven. And since it's data-driven, and since data is such a sensitive asset, right? It has a lot of information, and it has a lot of personal information. It can be misused. It can be mishandled. It can do the whole supply chain for building machine learning models pose a lot of potential for risk along the way, which I think, and especially risk that not all the stakeholders are always aware of, right? Like in many cases, people would just naively deploy technology that looks good on a test set without consideration that the real world in which the technology will operate, the test set is in no way a representative sample of that distribution, right? So because of all these potential pieces, I think there is important for education, right? For training, for deeper understanding of the threats, the pitfalls. And given that, I think we need to emphasize, and I think that's why we have responsible AI is very important. Yeah.
Before we go to Mark, you mentioned out of distribution a couple of times, and maybe for the sake of our audience, maybe you can say what the out of distribution means.
Yeah. So what I tried to say is it's data-driven, which means when you train an algorithm, mostly it's a pattern recognition system, right? We don't have yet the level of intelligence that we're aspiring to. Currently, we're mostly good at finding needles in haystacks somehow, which means we're still limited to the observations that we use to calibrate the algorithm. And this representative sets the hope we want it to generalize. That's why we train the model. So we expect the model to work elsewhere from that representative set. But the reality is that the more we move away from this in distribution, from these initial samples, the less we're able to capture regularity from the data. And when we're too far away, that's why we call out of distribution, right? So we're too far from what we known before, what the algorithm have been trained to operate on. And that's the unknown, right? The ultimate goal is we want algorithm to work on that out of distribution. Well, in many cases, we are not there yet.
Thanks so much. What are your thoughts, Mark?
Is this a responsible or irresponsible ballpoint pen? So it's framing question. I could write hate speech with this ballpoint pen, or I could write a really nice inspirational note to one of my kids. It's a piece of technology. I'm the agent, it isn't. And there's this really weird thing happening with AI where people are ascribing agency to it. And it's because of the interface that we are presented with. It's a chat bot. I'm talking to it. It feels like there's someone in there. And who knows, maybe there is. But it's still technology, and I'm still the agent. I'm the one using it. So you can go on the internet and you see people posting on Reddit, I made ChatGPT say this terrible thing. And everyone's pointing at ChatGPT and saying, it's a bad ballpoint pen. And no, like you, the person who prompted it to do that, you're accountable. And so this shifting of accountability onto the machine from me as a person suits some agendas, but I think is really problematic. American philosopher Dan Dennett, who recently passed tragically, spent his last months writing prolifically about this and worrying about the fact that we give this technology a human interface, that it has the affordances of a human relationship, is going to fool us into making really bad mistakes. And the biggest mistake is to give up our agency to it. And sometimes we do that unknowingly, and sometimes we do it absolutely with intent. So I can promote things without me being sullied. Oh no, the bad machine did that. So I think the question of, is there irresponsible or responsible AI? AI is just a technology. It's just a ballpoint pen. How it gets used is a human behavior problem, not a tech problem.
Perfect. So maybe I can kind of dig a little bit on that point of whether this pen is a responsible pen or not a responsible pen. I think a lot of people will argue with you that the difference between a pen and an intelligent agent is autonomy. So my pen cannot get up, start writing stuff. But I can build an AI system that decides that it wants to send you a message, gives you guidance, all of that with a bit of autonomy. What is your thoughts on the issue of autonomy, which AI kind of has a little bit, but other types of technology do not have the autonomy?
Yeah, for sure. And we will see increasing autonomy. This is going to be the year of agentic AI, where that autonomy takes another huge step forward. So it's a really good question. I think the critical point is to separate agency from autonomy. A Tesla car with, if you pay for the right feature, can semi-autonomously or autonomously drive. But there are still humans who are held accountable for that. The legal system is trying to figure out, is that the one behind the wheel or is that the engineer who designed it? But ultimately we hold human persons accountable. So just because a system is autonomous or semi-autonomous, if I'm the one accountable for the safety of that system, I am still the one accountable. And it is really important for humans to be clear on their agency and be ready to take accountability. And when I'm teaching young people how to ethically use AI, that is a huge point, is you do not get to pass off your decisions to prompt it in a bad way, or maybe it autonomously does something bad and then you go and post that on the internet. That was your choice to go and post that. You should have filtered that. So it is, you're in control, you are the agent, and you have to exercise your agency in a way that is ethical and just.
Maybe I can piggyback on that, right? So, I mean, we had a case with Air Canada, right? Yeah. So I think that was settled. That's the company needs to, it's the one responsible, right? So Air Canada, so they had a chatbot that interacted with customers, and the chatbot, of course, hallucinated. And as a result of that, it provided false information, right? And Air Canada wanted to distance itself from that false information. And I think rightfully it was decided that it is the responsibility of Air Canada, because Air Canada would choose to use the chatbot for that specific service. Going back to autonomy and agency, I think we'll be increasingly seeing more and more capable agents that are AI powered, interacting. But I think one thing is important is to understand that we do design those agents, right? Which means when we build them, we make decisions about their action space, right? In that sense, we are ultimately responsible of what they end up being capable of doing, right? So in case they are deployed and they do harm, I think the entity that's promoted and deployed the technology is the one who should be responsible.
Those are good points. I think the trade-off between agency and autonomy, and then also, we are the people who train the model, so we remain responsible for what they do. But a lot of the arguments, if you hear from the big tech, the Googles and the Metas, is that these are emergent behaviors that we couldn't anticipate. So how are you now asking us to predict something that we didn't actually know was going to happen?
My answer to that, it's short. So if a technology is not ready for deployment, we should not take the responsibility to deploy it. What's happening with large language model is that we observe something interesting with scale, right? So when we move from millions to billions of parameters, things that are trained to just predict next tokens seems to be able, because of the amount of information that they have been calibrated on, to capture other type of properties in the data, right? Which leads them to be able to do different things, which we call emerging behavior. But I think it's just a technical limitation of our current understanding of the technology. Ultimately, we have to understand why they're able to do that, right? Why they can capture those type of relations. We need to be able to quantify their uncertainty in doing those specific tasks, right? So it is a research problem. It is a technology problem. It's not, we shouldn't excuse ourselves by saying we just train them to do this, and then ultimately they will be able to do things we don't know. We have to know what they do, right, before deploying. So I think it's just a temporary issue. I think I'm confident that we will get a better and better understanding. That's why, like, if you look at the course of last year, most of the research work have been on evaluation, right? We have been probing, try to extract information from their structure, try to understand, test their limitation, and so on. It is a normal scientific pursuit, right? We have to strengthen and improve our understanding. With that to say, it doesn't free us from the responsibility of what they will ultimately end up doing.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, you're advocating for the fact that if I build an AI system, I need to make sure that this is what I want to deploy, because whatever that AI system does, I'm ultimately responsible.
That's why we test for systems.
Right. So if you think about software systems right now and maybe 5 years ago, you would write test cases, you would check for boundary cases, you would check that it doesn't do something wrong. But if the system is too complex, you can't realistically test this system in all scenarios. So you will, inevitably end up releasing a software system that you haven't exhaustively tested.
So I don't want to, maybe you want to.
Mark, you want to talk about that?
Carry on that line of thought, because I'm going to disagree and come at this from a
Doesn't matter, you can disagree with that line of thought.
But my point with that is that we need better evaluation mechanisms.
Right.
If the current testing practice doesn't scale, it means it's not adequate for this type of agent. So there is the whole debate about AGI, right? So ultimately, we want to train agents that will be able to autonomously take decisions, right? To be able to understand the impact of their decisions on the surrounding environments, and behavior close to what the human behavior is. But if you look at the society, we have mechanisms to somehow control for adverse behavior of humans, right? To ensure that we interact in a way that's serve to some extent the bigger benefit of the society. So I think there are technical challenges. I see these things are technical challenges that will be coming along the way as the agents will be more and more capable, as we will be able to design more advanced AI system. We have in parallel to be able to design more evaluation and control mechanisms that are suitable for that.
Okay, so I want to talk about a technical thing and then a social thing. The technical thing is, let's talk just about LLMs. So transformer, the models that are so popular right now. There was an early response post-chat GPT from Emily Bender, who's a computational linguist, saying these things are stochastic parrots. All they do is predict the next token. And that's right, but in the worst possible way. It's like saying, well, you ate a steak last night, which part of you is the cow, right? But that narrative is still out there. And people say, well, it just predicts the next token. And no, that's the wrong way to think about it. It does predict the next token because that's how it was trained. But the reality is, if you're predicting the next token in a proof of Gödel's theorem, you need to understand Gödel's theorem, or you do not have the right probability distribution for what the next token is going to be. And there is now a mountain of empirical evidence showing that these, at the large scale, especially the frontier tier models, are building world models that are dynamic in their activations. So they are, in Emily Bender's world, you're just talking to a stochastic parrot, you're just talking to the data on which you were trained, it can't do anything novel. No, we have proof now that it is doing novel things. And so as these models scale up, which is what's happening right now, they are going to be more creative and more novel. And so when big tech says, oh, well, it was emergent, I couldn't stop it, that's a cop-out. But they're actually right in the sense that governing a frontier model AI's behavior is a lot like governing human behavior. And the technical solutions we have right now, like reinforcement learning, where we're trying to put them on guardrails, are going to fail. And they're already starting to fail. There is a different approach. There's a company called Anthropic that's a group that split off from OpenAI. They have a very good AI safety team. And their approach is what they call constitutional AI, where instead of trying to use reinforcement learning or any of these other technologies to put the model on guardrails, they just give a preamble to the chatbot before it answers your question. Here's your constitution. Here are the things you believe. Here are the things you will never discuss. And I sort of trust you to figure out, just like we would a human coworker, like here are the rules of working in this environment or being a member of this society. And I think that approach is actually going to end up winning. And so everything we know about governing humans and human behavior will inform how we can govern these models. The social piece I want to talk about is, when we talk about aligned AI, we need to be cognizant that what we're actually talking about is cultural imperialism. ChatGPT has safeguards. There are things it will not discuss. And if I'm a Northern California tech bro, like, this is awesome. It's aligned. Its values are my values. If I grew up in sub-Saharan Africa, I may not recognize those values as mine. And so if we concentrate the power to decide what alignment means in the hands of a few very wealthy corporations and nations, that worries me a great deal. So I don't often go and praise Meta in public, but their decision to open source their models is, I think, a profound public good, because now any group with the expertise and resources, so you still have to have that, but way lower than training your own from scratch, can take that, fine tune it, put their guardrails on it, and so you can have localized AI that reflects the values of the community it's serving. And I think that's probably the only path forward, because I don't know that we figured out the human values alignment problem yet.
I think you wanted Futsu to also talk about AI value alignment.
Right, I totally agree. Right, I think it's a difficult problem, and especially there is no. I mean, we tend to think that there are universal values, but sometimes they can be conflicting values, and aligning those technology with conflicting goals and conflicting values is actually even a technical challenge, right? That we still are not very good at solving. So there's still a lot of interesting and important problems to unlock before we get to really safe AI systems.
All right, so that kind of a nice way to get us to this issue of the issue that's always talked about. AI has the potential to violate human rights, violate privacy of the people. The conference is about migration. We're talking about migrants, individuals who are pretty much minority groups. And now you're talking about the AI value alignment issue. If you think about AI value alignment, as you both said, it really depends on whose values are you talking about, whose values are you enforcing. Even with the anthropic approach, where you have the constitutional AI model, the company is still enforcing their own constitution, I would say, right? So even within a context of, let's say, North America, the population is so diverse. You have all these immigrants coming in with their own value systems, belief systems, and so on. How do you now ensure that you build an AI system? I understand that if it's a certain group of population, they want to take an AI system and fine tune it for their own values, they can do that. Meta supports open source, all of that. But if you're deploying an AI system now, let's say at the scale of Canada, what does that mean for the migrant population who are going to be exposed to this AI system?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So I think the technology is not ready currently for autonomous usage, right? So I think there needs to be a human agency in the loop. Yeah, so I think the AI system needs to come as a support, right? But there needs to be a human agency that does the check and balance of that alignment with what is our current sets of value that we want to enforce in this, right? I think it's the only way to ensure that the technology is used in the right way, right? So when we build a technology, as much as we can, we should make sure to take into account the different perspectives of the different stakeholders, including the minorities and others. But doing that with the current technology, the current understanding that we have will not be perfect anyway, right? So it will always be an approximation of what that reality is. But it can be a good support for making processes more smooth, more efficient, if there is a human who is still at the end taking the decisions and ensuring that what the technology is providing, it's in line with what's the guideline and the regulation that we have commonly agreed upon are supposed to be, right? So I think in that sense, it can be used efficiently, and we need that protocol around to mitigate the risk on those minorities. And I think we need constant review of how we use the technology, right? Constant assessment of what this is actually doing and bringing for that specific task on which we focusing on.
Advocating for a non-technical solution to govern the technical.
Exactly.
tools?
I think the human oversight is still very critical, right? Because regarding values, there are calls that humans can do that we don't necessarily want to automate in an AI system, right? Because if we get it wrong, we're just scaling the wrong solutions, right? So we're just amplifying the harms, right? So I think it's how we use the AI that will really make a difference. For things that are not critical, that are not centered around those sensitive decisions, yes, we can use the system to automate, because the faults that human can do, if we get it right in the technology, then we have better results than having humans multiplying the faults. Right? So I think how we use the technology is actually key.
Mark, your thoughts? I know you deal at a university level with deploying AI systems, and university is a microcosm of different people and different backgrounds. What are your thoughts?
Fully aligned with my colleague. So it's a fundamental principle of natural justice in our society that I'm entitled to a jury of my peers. And when I think about legal process, I want an administrative decision maker to be a human. Even if I were to create an AI that had an IQ of 500, it's not my peer. It's something different. It isn't a human. It doesn't have human lived experience. It may have read about it. It's not going to have emotions the same way I do. It may have its own emotions, but it isn't a peer. It's something new and different. And so I don't want the final decision being made by an alien mind. I want it to be made by a mind that is at least has sympathy and empathy for mine. So that's the first point. But can the alien mind help me make better decisions? I'll give you a concrete example. We did a little experiment. I won't name the agency. We took some grant reviews from a fairly large competition, and we had an AI that had been trained and tuned and prompted to specifically look for violations of EDI concerns. So it was really checking that reviewers were following the rules. And it found things that the human EDI experts on the panel didn't, including, did you notice that this panelist here, panelist B, despite being asked not to use gendered pronouns, consistently use gender pronouns only when referring to female applicants. And because it can look at data on a scale that is beyond what a human can look at, quickly and enthusiastically, and report like, there's a problem there. And so that allowed an immediate intervention that would have just gone, it wouldn't have happened because it would have gone unnoticed previously. So if you use the technology as a support, it can be incredibly powerful. But again, it's you, the human agent, and how you're using it that determines if it's a responsible use, or if we're just saying, well, what do we need a human panel for anymore? It can just make the grant decisions. That saves NSERC a bunch of money.
And I think you just named the funding agency.
No, that data was not actually.
Okay. So Bertie is telling me that we're kind of out of time and we need to take questions, but I want to ask you a final question. And I hear both of you saying the technology solution can be integrated as long as there is some human oversight and responsibility, and the agency is not with the system, it's with the humans. Thinking about an immigration process, what stages of an immigration process of an application submitted to an immigration processing unit at the government do you think could or should not be automated through an AI system?
Well, easy. I think the ultimate decision, grants or not grant the decision, should be a human. That's so. But all the data collections, the facts extractions and information upfronts could be supported with advanced technology. I think it's something that's already being done in many places around the world. But of course, we should not have an automated end-to-end process. I think that would be a huge mistake because there's still biases in those tools, right? So they are still imperfect. I mean, they can miss important clues. They can make up things, we know. But they can actually also uncover facts that only the human wouldn't have uncovered, right? So I think providing all this information to a human in the agency of deciding could enrich the decision process and actually, I believe, lead to more fair outcome, in my opinion.
So much smaller scale, but as someone who has to implement technology and policy at a diverse institution, I think about this a lot. And my conclusion is I'm the last person that the community should be asking because I'm a technologist. And it's actually the community themselves. So late last week, we got the results of our first survey of student, staff, and faculty on AI. And you'll be shocked to know that our students were extremely positive on being allowed to use AI in the completion of their coursework, like massive, big green bar. And then we asked a question, how do you feel about professors using AI to grade your coursework? And overwhelmingly the most negative response out of anything, including people who are worried about like Terminator end of world scenarios, but I'm more worried that my prof's going to use AI. And so I shouldn't be making that decision. The prof alone shouldn't be making the decision. It is really a consultative process with the most affected stakeholders. And I would say it's the same in the immigration space. You would want a diversity of stakeholders to comment on what they were comfortable with. As a technologist, I can advocate, here are ways it could help, but the final decision needs to be made by whoever's governing that, informed by those who are going to be affected.
I couldn't agree more with that. So we're taking questions and we have microphones and we already have a lot of hands going up. So maybe we can take 3 questions, we'll get the answers and then we'll take the next 3. Yes, please. If you could just introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Yeah, my name is Blaine Kumar from Bright Immigration. I also own 2 technology immigration platforms. So I've been in the industry for 12 years. I've done over 10,000 consultations personally. So I gotta tell you, biases, mistakes, I've seen them constantly, endlessly. To a point, I wonder, are we putting AI or this expectation of any technology, even a calculator at one point, are we putting this in an unfair position compared to a human? So AI, the amount of rejections and the ridiculousness I've seen from IRCC and from any regulatory body, I should say, is riddled with issues and mistakes. So the question is AI better? Go back to like the Tesla car, for example, on the highway. Sure, yeah, one accident, everyone erupts in madness that Tesla's cars are garbage, but that's not true when you compare it to a human driver. So what benchmarks are we actually establishing to prove if the biases that humans already exude, and not to mention that humans have to be trained, not to mention that biases change. Someone could get robbed by a certain minority group tomorrow and now their biases changed. Compared to AI, which is something that technically we could actually control and create more barriers or follow the anthropic approach, et cetera, et cetera. So my question takeaway is, what metrics are we actually doing to monitor human biases and actually set a benchmark? Is AI doing better or worse than we are?
Thanks so much.
Oh, I'm over here. Yeah. About the survey, how many respondents? Did you read the open ends or use AI?
All right, thank you, Stuart. Next question.
Andre here, I'm an academic from Australia. The question is in the context of migration, when you look at countries like Canada, Australia, or USA, skilled migration represents almost 70% of the intake of permanent migration. They are mainly working in sectors such as communication, agriculture. Do you think that a combination of AI with, let's say, robotic process automation could kill the intake of skilled migration because they no longer need them, because the technology will take over the jobs they are being given, so the technology will take over. Do you think it will kill the migration, the intake of permanent migration in these countries? And if so, if migrants now represent almost 60% of a population growth, like in Australia, higher in Canada, higher in USA, do you think this ADT is going to create more mess with an aged population without appropriate structures to meet the aging population because the migration has been killed by ADTs. Thanks so much.
So maybe we could quickly answer Stuart's question about the population size and whether you use ChatGPT in your
So
survey.
number of respondents, we got about 10% of every demographic we surveyed. So a couple thousand students, about 150 faculty, and 200-300 staff. So not bad. And we did use, I used Claude 3 actually to summarize, but I also went through them by hand because I'm just really curious. And I noticed some things that it didn't, and it noticed trends that I didn't.
Thank you. So maybe if it's,
Yes.
I'll start from the third question and then we'll work our way to the first question. This idea of impact of AI in general on employment, and then also impact of that on immigrant populations.
Yeah.
Do you see it as an issue, or do you see that as an issue of upskilling, or what are your thoughts?
So I think that's I mean, both. I think all the questions are very, very interesting question, very, very good, great question. So the impact of AI on the labor market in general, right, would be certain. I think there will be displacement of jobs, right? I don't think the automation will just kill off all the jobs, but it will change the nature of the jobs, right? Certain jobs will, I think we shouldn't pretend it wouldn't happen. Certain type of job that could be automated easily to a certain extent will cease to become considered as skilled jobs, right? But then there will be a new generation type of jobs that will be more in demand because of AI, right? Because we need to complement AI, because we need to also maybe develop that AI system better. So I think there will always be space, in my opinion, at least to a certain extent, for skilled workforce. Maybe not the exact same group that is currently coming, but there will be a need for a different group, right? So which is why I think training is very important, right? We need to be upskilling everywhere, worldwide, right? If we want to keep having this immigrants coming in, they also need to learn those jobs of tomorrow, right? Where they are, right? To be skilled and fluent on those jobs so that they can still come and do the job. There will be new type of jobs that will emerge from this revolution, definitely. And there will be some type of jobs that will not consider skilled jobs, in my opinion. I want to go back to the questions about the bias, right? Because that's no, I'll just finish and then because this is something I've been asked all the time, right? Because we always say we need the technology, especially I do some work on autonomous driving. I'm vocal about how unsafe they still are and how it's not responsible to necessarily pretend that we have level 4 while we don't have level 4 and so on. Of course, human drivers are terrible, right? But I don't think that should be the baseline. Well, I think we already know that most of the bias we get in AI models come from our own bias that we distill in the data that we use to train the models, right? So in that sense, I don't think that should be the baseline for comparison. So we building this technology to do better, right? To do better than we currently do, means to be outperforming humans. Now, regarding the standard of safety, if we consider autonomous driving, how will you decide that the technology is mature enough? I think maybe we can make the parallel with what happened with the automotive industry, right? In the early days. It was based on a monitoring on fatalities, right? And I think if I remember correctly, the benchmark at that time was compared to the healthiest population, age, I think around 40 and 30. And they wanted to compare the amount of fatality due to automotive in comparison to regular random fatality that happen in the healthier population. So if the technology doesn't kill more than we experience normally, it's considered acceptable to some extent. I mean, that was what was done back in the days. It's not necessarily the same standard that apply today, but I think we have to decide where we put the cursor. But ultimately, the goal is for the technology to empower us, to keep us safe and to improve us, not to compete with human drivers. We already know humans are terrible at many, many things.
+1 to all of that.
Sorry? No, no, please go ahead.
I don't mean to interject, but it's the highest, most important conversation, I think. But we're not measuring bias now on a human element. Like, I don't think we are. Like, I've heard from immigration officers, and I've heard stories of, like, they notice after the fact that an officer seems to be leaning one way, but there's no actual measurement to determine. Not to mention, is the bias actually on basis of some fact or not, right? Some biases means that the decision is leaning towards a direction, but the direction could be warranted. Some countries, for example, I know some countries are more prone for fraud than others, and vice versa, right? Whatever the case is. So I'm just saying we're not measuring the human element as it is. And your point, and listen, this is a hard question, so please don't feel you have to answer it. But you've mentioned the car, that's measurable, right? You could go to the coroners, you could go to medical reports, you could get data and say this person died because of this. But we can't say this officer is biased against this minority group amongst a country that has 4 or 5 distinct populations. So yeah, that's all. But
yeah, I agree for that. But I think they are indicators that we can monitor at least over time, right? So if we adopt the technology and review our practices and monitor these indicators over time, I think we can have a sense of where we're heading, right? Whether or not we're doing better and better. Ultimately, we want to do better than the current state.
Thanks so much. We're going to take 2-3 more questions. And there's one question, I think our colleague was shaking his head. We'll take his question there and then take 2 more questions. But my thought on if our expectation is for the AI people to come in and tell us how to measure bias in the immigration sector, we're kind of screwed. Those benchmarks and how we evaluate where are the biases, what sorts of biases and so sorts, I think needs to come from the immigration community itself, the people who are dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis. Once you start measuring those biases, I think that's what Foots also alluded to. Then those metrics could also be applied where technology is being applied, right? For the technology, the computer scientists, the AI experts to come and tell you, here's a benchmark for measuring bias, will probably very likely 100% get it wrong. But where are the questions? Yes, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Shan Gupta. I'm a professor at Algoma University. I just wanted to respond to the comment made that we're not measuring human bias in the immigration system. We are. IRCC does internal surveys, which are publicly published, talking about, hey, we've identified some biases in our decision-making systems. There's external news reporting going on saying that the percentage of applicants being refused from Francophone African countries is much higher than other countries. So that report exists. Third, there's immigration lawyers in Canada that follow IRCC decision-making processes and technology, like Chinook, look it up, very closely, and monitor the bias that is being incorporated from the human decision-making database into the technologies. Follow lawyers like Will Tao, Steve Murans. There's a lot of people looking into the issue. So to say that we're not measuring human bias is not true.
Thank you. There's a comment at the back. Yes, please.
Hi, this is Metin from Okasi. Thank you to panelists for excellent talks. My question is about responsibility and accountability. If you are not responsible, you cannot be held accountable, right? Let me give an example. Recently, CBSA, like Canadian Border Service Agency, used app called ArriveCan, right? The ArriveCan, there was some errors in the app and people had to self-quarantine, even they didn't have COVID. And when the company was questioned by the MPs, they were like, we just use the data given by CBSA. And CBSA is like, we are not expertise in this. Like we hired them to do the job and they failed to do the job. So if there is a harm done by an app, not in person, that goes back to like autonomy and the agency question. Who do people go after? People who were harmed by app how do people go after this? To have this accountability, is there any regulation necessary? And my second question is very quick, less serious. When you look at the picture on the screen, do you think it's generated by ChatGPT? And if yes, how do you tell the difference? Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. There's a question at the front here. Oh, there's one there. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for to all the panelists. I just want to push the argument of the values alignment a little bit more, which anyway is a bit problematic, as we know. I don't know, are there universal human values? We've talked about that. But what about interest alignment? Whose interest is being served? Because in the migration sector, there are so many stakeholders, there are so many interests, and which are often contradictory to each other. So how do we, and also there's a power issue here. So if the reins of AI are held in the hands of those who have power over another group, and I'm talking about policymakers, and on the other side, maybe the people who have lived experience. As researchers, we may focus as much as we want on lived experience, but if we don't have the tools, the power, the ability for the kind of scaling that AI and ADTs can, that can happen, what's the solution there? And how do we, what's the equity, where's the equity, and how do we kind of bridge those divides? Thank you.
Let's take one more question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Tanya. And I guess my question is around the piece of labor and AI, because we already see technology being used to make labor and productivity more affordable when it's convenient, right? Because sometimes physical personal labor is cheaper and also more exploitable. And so that gets taken up by corporations, by governments, including Canada. And so when we think about AI and employment or AI and labor, I mean, the intention potentially is in fact to create more productivity for cheaper, for less, on a cheaper basis. Well, then if it's doing exactly what it's meant to do, that can create a greater divide between the working class and like the rich and the poor, for example, but also the intention behind AI is often to find ways of exploitation, to find ways of destruction, including in war, including in genocide. And so that responsibility is actually, the intention is doing exactly what it's, the technology is doing exactly what the intention behind it was, right? So I don't know if it's a question or something to sort of chew on, but I'm not convinced by this dichotomy of intention and responsibility and the outcomes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So Mark and Foots, we have three kind of broad topics here, and I'll let you decide which one you want to tackle. The issue of autonomy versus agency, and also issue of regulation. If we're thinking about regulation,
I'll start with that one. So there is now case law in Canada, the Air Canada chatbot, that if an LLM is acting as an agent of your person, including corporate person, you're accountable. And so, I mean, that could be challenged, and it'll be interesting to see how that all washes out. But right now, there's case law you can point to that says in I can't remember which province it was, but in that jurisdiction, there you go. There's a judgment been rendered already. We will need multiple levels of social intervention here. And the EU AI Act, even though it's not perfect, is a pretty remarkable piece of legislation given how quickly it was put together and the multitude of stakeholders. And they took a real principles-based approach. So things like facial recognition for policing, that is just criminalized, full stop, that we will not do that. So it reflects the values of the community and puts hard boundaries around what can and can't be done. And there's criminal penalties for doing those things. There will also be softer regulations in different areas, and it's really going to depend. An area like migration and immigration is going to be extremely difficult to get right. You will need experts, again, not technologists, experts who are living in this world all day, every day, to suggest regulations. And where the real tension is going to be is between the desire to encode things in statute and the reality that with a technology that is still improving on an exponential path right now, the need to put things into regulation where they're flexible. And like, that sounds great, put everything into regulation, but we already have a problem with AI startups leaving Canada because of the regulatory risk. We haven't even passed C27. We will eventually, and that's a good piece of legislation, especially the amended version with the standing committee right now, but it kicks a lot to regulation. And so if I'm starting up a company, I think that's a lot of regulatory risk. So how do you balance that, giving your community stability and firm guidelines that are hard to change because they're encoded in legislation, and being agile with regulation? And I have no easy answers there because it's way above a computer scientist pay grade.
The other, Futsa, maybe you want to take this one on. It's a hard one. And I think question 2 and 3 were touching on the same principles. The issue of interest alignment, power, exploitation, access to technology, and what that means for certain populations. Do you think it's an issue of AI or an issue of technology as a whole, or it's an issue of socioeconomic power distribution? What are your thoughts?
I think it's an issue of technology in general. I think it's not specific with AI, right? I think AI is probably an amplifier because of the potential impact that it can have. But I think this power imbalance, having a few controlling and using it for driving different agenda, it's a socioeconomic problem that we have to solve, right? Regardless of whether or not we're using AI for different purposes. Now, that's it. I think currently, if you look at the current AI development path that we are on, there is clearly an imbalance, right? And I think that's a big threat. That's something we really need to collectively make sure we're aware of it, which is why things like open sourcing that made a push at some point, although, so I have mixed feeling about open sourcing large language model, because first, I think it's good that everyone have access to the technology because it's allowed for democratizing this, right? But still you need a lot of computing resources to actually be able to leverage this, which means it's not really democratizing because there is still a huge cost to that's hidden behind. But at least it's out there, right? But also the fact that it's open means it can be misused, because one thing we seem to assume is that when the technology is out there, it's just a tool. It's a tool that can be used for very different purpose. Now, if you have a very powerful tool that has a higher potential of harm if misused, that you put it out there, available to everyone, it's bring additional regulation and crack and control challenges, right? Because a lot of people we may not want to have access to this technology will be able to have access to it, right? Which means this will lead to new type of risk or certain type of risk that we may want to avoid. So I think it's a complex scene, but I think democracy approach is still better. So I think it's more that we ensure that everyone have access to this, at least globally, not every individual, but at least organized entities could have access to this to create some kind of balance in how this is used in practice. Now, if I come back to the scientists' hats, I don't think researchers in AI have a specific agenda that they're driving. I think the obsession of everyone is to get a better understanding of intelligence, right? And build more and more capable technology. Now, there is the technology that's different from the science. So there are companies that are building technology out of this science that is being produced. And I think that's where we need to do some oversight. We need to control for what kind of technology we want people to be building and deploying in the society. And that's why regulation is very important. An approach based on risk, right? A bit like the EU have done. Because I think if we're too aggressive, we end up with the problem of potentially killing innovation in our show, right? So we need to manage based on risk. And of course, high risk technology needs to be handled more carefully. And it's a complex one. And there is power imbalance. There are agendas that are being driven by this technology, but it's a socio-economic problem, I think.
Thank you. Mark, your thoughts. You're okay. All right. We maybe take 2 more questions. What's that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I am Ilian Sawafta, PhD student, University of Alberta. Like lately, I have been thinking about digimodernism, especially Alan Kirby work, how new technologies dismantle the past modern and reconfigure our culture. But my question here is about especially immigrants who come from particular contexts, let's say Africa, Middle East. And we see the society super attached to advanced digital technology. So maybe my question is, how does the increasing integration of AI in various aspects of society contribute to decrease feelings of alienation among individuals? Because we see people, I came from a context, we barely use technology in our daily life. To a context in a university, we use technology in everything. So I'm just curious about this this dimension of using technology. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe the last question right behind you. Yep.
It's on. Hi, thank you. I just want to return to the question of power. I feel that we just saying, well, we have to have regulations doesn't speak to the gorilla in the room, which is that there are huge corporations that have very clear relationships to governments around the world, that corporate rule and political rule is merged in many different complex ways right now. And at this very moment when AI is taking off, and it seems to me that's what we have to be addressing. In terms of migration, there's a migration industry. Borders create ways of making profit. Private profit and equity is privatizing for everything from detention centers to integration. So when we put AI in that mix, we have to address the fundamental question that's been raised about who, there aren't just equal stakeholders. There is, in fact, a hierarchy of power. And when we talk about just regulating it, we have to talk about what's at stake, and democracy is really at the center of the question.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Canada's a little better off, but I spent a bit of time in DC, and there is no lobby more prevalent on this file than the tech industry. They are outspending, out-talking, and right now they are pushing the current administration to develop regulations that look a lot to an outsider like regulatory capture. And so that is a future we could inhabit if we allow it to happen. But my inner Mencius wants to see the good in humanity. We, as citizens of a democracy, can hold our governments accountable to distribute the power. This is the first time we've had a major technological invention where the infrastructure to bring it to more than half of humanity is already in place. If you invent the steam engine in the 19th century, not everyone can build a steam engine right away. We live in a world where more than 54% of humans own a smartphone. It's not all of humanity, but it's more than half. That is a technological conduit and infrastructure to whatever governments want to provide. You can imagine a world in which there are sovereign, or if I'm being really optimistic, multilateral AI systems where we view it as a public good in the true economic sense, non-rival, non-excludable. AI systems are expensive to run, but in the context of a sovereign national budget, not all that much. These are policy choices that we could make. They're not technology choices. And those policy options are there and available for us to push for. So, I mean, you know what I'm saying when I'm in Ottawa, it is if we want this technology to be equally distributed and as accessible as possible, we can choose to do that. There are no technical impediments. In fact, there are technical accelerators to it, but it's a choice. And your question is exactly right. This is a very powerful technology. It is transformative. Talking earlier about agency, it can be a powerful transformative agent for good or for the other kind. And it's up to us which world we want to inhabit. And I can't help as a technologist other than advocate for good policy. So thank you for the question.
Well, maybe just emphasize, I think it's actually very urgent that the society collectively contribute to the debate, right? Because the corporations are actively trying to steer the regulation in a direction that will suit them better. And they have a lot of resources, they are putting a lot of resources in doing this, right? So if the many are silent, we'll end up having something that doesn't serve the purpose of the public. But I think one also key part behind this is the education, because I think most of the people actually trying to contribute to this debate, our MPs and others, I would take some glove here, but I think in many cases, they have a limited understanding of the technology, right? So we really need to make sure that people who can contribute to help this going forward really understand the technology. We need to be talking about this more. People need to be experimenting. People need to learn about what this technology is really about so that we regulate them, the technology in the way that would really serve the purpose of the majority. It's a difficult one. I don't know better question on this, but there is a risk of peril because there is a risk of regulation washing, a risk of ethic washing. There are people actively using those things that everyone knows should be put in place, but not necessarily steering them in a direction that they should be.
Thank you so much, Foots and Mark. I know most of you already blame us AI scientists for all the biases and issues and problems you're having with ChatGPT. So we don't want you to blame us for standing in the way of lunch, at least. So please thank our wonderful panelists for the thoughtful discussion. Thank you very much, Mark. And
thank you.